Hello and welcome to the rareliquid podcast. This interview is with Marek, a former Evercore banker who graduated from the University of Florida. Marek was actually a guest speaker at a private webinar I hosted, and his insights were so helpful to everyone that I wanted to publish an interview with him on YouTube as well, so you all could get it for free. We weren't able to interview in person, so please forgive that audio quality isn't consistent, but I'm sure his banking recruiting tips, especially coming from a non-target school background, will be super helpful for all of you. Real quick before we continue, if you're watching this video, there's a good chance that you want this, right? And if so, just give me 60 seconds and I'll show you why most candidates are preparing for banking recruiting completely wrong. There are two things that make banking recruiting tougher than ever before. First is that banks are hiring undergrads earlier, meaning you have less time to prepare. And second, competition is getting smarter with so many resources available, and this has led to sub 1% acceptance rates at some top banks. But if you prepare the right way, these numbers shouldn't scare you. I constantly see candidates memorizing the same technical guides, sending hundreds of LinkedIn messages just into the void, and honestly just wasting a lot of time because the students who land offers are the ones who truly understand how the banking recruiting process works, meaning they know how to position their background, send messages bankers respond to, and learn technicals the right and most efficient way. There are shortcuts to recruiting, and that's exactly what we teach in my mentorship program, the Banking Accelerator, where you'll work directly with me and coaches from top banks to land your offers. On October 1st, I'm opening our final cohort for 2025. You can sign up using the link in the description below, which will only take 5 seconds, and you'll also receive my recruiting guide with over 70 slides and additional resources. Looking forward to meeting those of you able to join, and now back to the video. So hey, Marek, thanks so much for making the time. And just to get things started, can you tell us about your background?
Yeah, totally. And thanks for having me on. So my name is Marek. I was born in Prague in the Czech Republic. I lived in Europe broadly until I was about 14 and then moved to the States. I did high school in Florida and then continued to do university in Florida. I went to the University of Florida studying finance at both the bachelor and master's level. There's an interesting program there that lets students combine graduate courses with undergraduate courses and finish everything in sort of the typical 4-year program. I held a couple internships during that time. I worked for a call it VC fund looking to take companies in the ESG space and help them eventually get SPAC'd, which tells you about the time we were in. And then eventually got an internship with Evercore, working across 4 groups. It's a generalist summer. And then came back to Evercore full-time, spent 2 years with the Media and Information Services group there, and then just left Evercore, and I will be joining Apex in their tech/software team in a couple of weeks here.
Awesome. And so you were at University of Florida. Can we go back a few years and you think about your recruiting process, and can you walk us through a little bit about how you were feeling about coming from, I guess, like a non-target? Like, what are some obstacles that you felt like you faced compared to maybe others who are coming from target programs? And then I have some follow-up questions to that.
Yeah, totally. So I'll throw another caveat in there. I was on the F1 visa. I was an international student at school. So that sort of complicates the journey into finance even more. But broadly speaking, the non-target experience boils down to having to be better prepared than someone who isn't in a non-target position. If you are studying at institutions that have long-term relationships with many of the banks on Wall Street, you can afford to be less polished. You might get a couple more chances. I think the approach that I took to my preparation was, if I get an interview, I would like to convert that into an internship and then a full-time role. And there's really not much room for an error. I think the saying is hungry dogs run faster. And so within my preparation, it was really putting in extra effort and understanding that there will be obstacles. Many of them you can assume. It's you don't have as many connections. You might not know people that have done this, so you don't have that sort of first person recollection of what the job is and what should you say in interviews. And so you really have to treat yourself as the ultimate resource and put in extra time and put in extra effort. And I, not to slight my program, I was fortunate enough that the University of Florida as a whole is less of a target school, but this program, the MSF program, has connections on Wall Street. And so ultimately, my Evercore internship, I was not the first person to get it. There have been many folks to have done that before me, but there are two spots out of a program of 50. And so you really are in a hyper competitive situation, and the couple of shots that you get, you have to execute on. And I'm happy to dive into details there.
Right. Yeah. And I think one thing that I would kind of comment on there is that a lot of students do think about, I'm from a non-target, but there are opportunities to get a master's degree in like finance at that. Like it sounds like maybe you went into undergrad with having gone into both, or did you apply to the master's program later?
Yeah, so the nuance there is essentially they will have a pre-program, down selection uh, process, and what begins as a program of 100 people boils down to, by the end of it, 50 that will go on to do the graduate program. And you have to take the GMAT, and you have to do an application, and so it is selective in that case. But going into UF, I specifically knew that this program would increase my chances at being able to land on Wall Street. It's sort of synonymous with finance at this point, but you have to know what you're doing kind of early. I mean, interviews are happening your sophomore year, oftentimes in December or January now. So I think going into college, knowing that this is what I want to do, I think it's a great way to start your career. How can I best position myself within the university? It was really this program, and then I will also, give a shout out or say that there are certain organizations that can make or break your preparation. I was fortunate enough to join sort of the premier investment fund on campus, and obviously students there. It's a self-selected group that is likely to go and do well on Wall Street, or at least land those jobs. And so I was lucky to have a couple mentors who have done their internships and are in their senior year, and happy to help freshmen and sophomores really trying to learn even what to do and how to get to that position. And I believe those sort of organizations exist on every campus nowadays, because it's well understood that having that kind of experience prior to an internship could be very helpful.
Right. Yeah. So then I guess two comments on that. One is, yeah, I work with a lot of candidates who are in undergrad programs, kind of running out of time. So it is kind of tough to take on, let's say, like an extra semester being a senior, or getting a 1-year master's degree. And you may have a higher chance of getting into a master's of finance program at the university you're already attending. So it sounds like you are in a different situation, obviously, than what I'm saying, but that is, like, for anyone listening, coming from a non-target, an option for you to take a master's in finance that provides some pathway into banking from a non-target. And then second, I had the exact same experience as you in undergrad, where I joined a business organization that had a lot of mentors, alumni who worked at banks, and that was huge for my preparation for banking recruiting. And on that topic of what you're saying, of you don't have as many at bats at a non-target as coming from a non-target, let's say, and so the number of interviews you get, final rounds, maybe a little less than at others if you come from a different target school. So for you, what was most helpful when you were preparing and making sure you're putting that extra effort compared to everyone else? Like, what resources and things that you did, what was most helpful for interview prep?
Totally. So I'll start with specifics, and we might get a little bit more into the broader topics. But I would say everyone needs to understand finance, right? It's one thing to sort of learn the MNI 400 and think that you've got all the questions down, and so you're prepared. I took a different approach. I really wanted to know the topics that I'm discussing in these interviews, and so broadly speaking, that's your valuation techniques. That's going to be fundamental accounting. That's going to be some fundamental business aspects. And there was a resource called the Investment Banking Interview Guides, IBIG. You can find them online, for free. There's PDFs. And I read through all of those. It's sort of 90 pages per topic, and I would say those were a fantastic foundation for just understanding what is it that I even need to know going into these interviews. And obviously, the basic concepts, having taken some finance courses, they came naturally to me. But there are more advanced concepts that you then have to spend extra time drilling into. And so I started quite early. I sort of read through these guides my freshman spring, and then going into freshman summer, it was around the time of COVID. And so I had all the time on my hands to sort of just drill down deeper. And here comes the second piece, which I think it's super important to have a group with you that is also interested in the same things. It doesn't have to be at the same school. It doesn't even have to be people that you would necessarily associate with outside of just this very specific goal of getting into banking. It's just very important to have others that motivate you, and you can sort of remain. I would say you can look out for each other's weaknesses and point them out much better than if you're locked in a bubble and you are only paying attention to what you are aware of. And so I had a group that we did behavioral prep together. I had a group that I did technical prep with separately. Those two pieces are obviously all that interviews are comprised of. And at Evercore, it was much more skewed towards the technical portion. But I would almost say the behaviorals were an assumed starting point. If you can't present well during an interview, you really wouldn't get much distance in them. And so it was those two pieces, trying to understand everything that I'm talking about, not just memorizing answers. And really, I think the IB guides are a great starting point, and then you go and dig deeper as you can, and you use Macabacus and Wall Street Oasis and all the other places where people have given sort of long form answers. Nowadays, you can use ChatGPT and all the other AI tools. And then the second part is work on your behaviorals and hopefully work with a group of people so you can do mock interviews, so you can really get practice even just speaking about yourself and about your experiences. And I think if you do all that and you put meaningful time behind it, you'll be prepared.
Yeah. So going into, let's say, Evercore's recruiting process, I want to ask about some of the questions asked throughout interview processes and things like that at Evercore. But first, can you, for those who don't really know super well, walk us through what the recruiting process was like? What for you, was it just like a matter of a few phone calls for first rounds and then a super day, or what was the process like for you?
Yeah, totally. I'll caveat that having sort of gone through this MSF program and really knowing a couple of people on campus, I would say there were a number of informal interviews already, just getting to know people. None of them really counted towards, what HR would consider like rounds of interviews, but it was important in establishing who I am, why I would like to work here, what I have done to position myself to maybe be successful. And then there was a resume collection. Most everyone who submitted a resume got a first round interview. Resumes are submitted on a rolling basis, so the advice is always to go as early as possible. And then you have a first round interview, which typically takes place with an analyst at the firm. It'll be 30 minutes across over Zoom, and it's mostly technical. So I would say you'll get a couple behavioral questions, the classic, tell me about yourself, why are you interested in banking, perhaps why are you interested in this firm specifically, and then the rest of it will be a mix of questions between accounting, valuation, sort of technical, math questions. I would say really it's all you can eat. And so if you're progressing quickly and you get to minute 20 and the interviewer has gotten through all the prepared questions they had, it's up to them to either have a frank conversation with you or to just give you more questions. But it is a lot of tick the box. It's if you perform well, you're personable, there's no red flags, then you're likely to get an invitation to the super day. And then that takes the form of 4 30-minute interviews back to back to back to back. And you get flown out to New York. It's in Evercore offices. And then the interviews there are associate, VP, MD, and partner, some mix of those roles. It is not uncommon to have, for example, 3 MDs and 1 associate. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that because associates and VPs are involved, that it'll be majority them. And then again, there are prepared sort of topics that each interview is supposed to hit. And as long as you're progressing well, there'll be a debrief at the end of the day, sort of comparing all the candidates. And then, the decisions are made on who receives an offer. There's an unofficial wait list. So if you do well, but not well enough to receive an offer in that day, you might get kept for a couple of days or a couple of weeks to see if there's someone else that you might bump out. In my experience, it doesn't happen too often. And that's really it in a nutshell.
So then what do you remember feeling when you actually got your offer? And also, like, do you remember, was it like right away? Or were you like waiting a little bit? Like, what was that like?
Yeah, I remember it was like the 13th of May, and I just moved apartments for the summer, and I had done the interviews in my very sparsely decorated room, and then it was on a Thursday, and then the Friday after, right before end of business, I got the call saying, hey, we'd like to extend an offer. You did super well. And so I would say that's typical. If you are receiving an offer, it'll be the day of or the day after. If you're in like a later session and people can't get a hold of you, or there's some admin pieces that need to take place, then it could take a couple of days. But largely, I think all the super days take place on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so it should be the day after. And it was just it's a moment of pure joy, right? You've worked for
Yeah.
something so hard, and then it pays off. And I remember calling my parents, and I remember calling most everyone who had helped on that journey. And that's the other part about having a group that you share this experience with. It makes the reward so much better. And I remember being on the receiving end of calls where my friends were saying, "Hey, I just got an offer. It feels so great. I want to share it with you." So it sort of makes it all worth it. And in that moment, all the nights and days where you are working and trying to memorize things and trying to study and trying to understand concepts, they make it worth it. But also you realize now I have to go do the job. And so, if I had perhaps skirted by and gotten an offer without knowing finance or without being ready for the eventual job, I think I would feel a moment of panic. But this way I felt this is great. I can now go show that all the things I talked about, I know in practice as well.
Yeah, I know. I actually felt as though almost getting the job itself sometimes can feel a little bit harder than the actual job itself. And I will say there was like a very steep learning curve for me as well in the first like initial few months. And you have to learn all the Excel shortcuts and how to build presentations, like have insane attention to detail. That's like people cannot understand until you're actually on the job in banking. But getting the actual job, I think for a lot of people is almost as difficult, if not as like the actual job. And especially when 6 to 12 months into the job in banking, I feel like you really like find your groove. But I guess going into going a little bit back to your interview process and for Evercore, which is known for to be a little bit more, or elite boutiques in general are known to have a little bit more of like intense technicals and stuff like that. So I was wondering if you could share if you remember at all, either through your recruiting process or maybe as like an interviewer yourself from at Evercore, what were some of the harder kind of technical questions that were asked, just so people
Yeah,
could get a taste?
totally. And I'll just throw in, I think banking, recruiting, and then the job itself is very similar to some of the more prestigious universities where the acceptance rate might be 5%, but the people that make it there, then 99% of them graduate. So it's almost once you can get in, you really are in a subselect of people, and you do well. Um, so I formulated many of the questions that we used for first round interviews, both broadly in sort of the beyond core section, but also for UF candidates specifically. Um, by the time I was an analyst, we had the privilege of running our first rounds for UF candidates specifically, and then they would go on to the general pool for super days. And we wouldn't really hold any punches, so it's a lot of TV math questions. I remember I made one that was about divestitures, and then trying to understand, the divested company trades at some multiple, and the RemainCo trades at some other multiple. What are the proceeds and stuff like that. The specifics of it escape me now, but I would say the main piece here is that most of these questions are solvable, and you can get there fairly easily. Unlike maybe consulting interviews, the point is not to trick you. It's to give you enough information, and if you feel like you're missing information, ask for it. It's possible that that's the trick in and of itself. You're supposed to ask for an extra piece of information. Tax rates are notorious sort of missing pieces. And then the other part is, if you know somewhat fundamental finance, you can really work your way to an answer if you haven't encountered this specific question before. So an example with this divestiture, I don't think many people spend time learning about it, but as long as you understand sort of what makes up valuation, and that multiples have a nominator and a numerator and a denominator, and if you reduce one, you probably have to reduce the other. It kind of it can be figured out. And so what we found is the people that did well on our first rounds then went on to crush the super days because they had the right sort of mindset. You have your typical basic accounting questions about depreciation, how things move through all the income statement, balance sheet, and cash flow. And I would say having almost better than getting to the right answer is getting there in a logical way. And people that can speak their answer and walk the interviewer through their thought process, that's always appreciated. Having been on the other side, it's much better than just getting an answer and having to sort of prod at how did you get there. And then the last piece of advice would be how you take feedback. And that's honestly also important in a lot of the first round interviews, because it's possible that you might miss a question or just not get something. And interviewers could choose to give you feedback or try and guide you to an answer. And if you're not coachable and if you are stubborn, that's a ding, and it's going to sort of show poorly against you. Whereas if you show that you can take feedback, that's very important for the real job. And so you might even get some grace, and the fact that you missed the question might not matter as much.
Yeah. I mean, I think what everyone needs to realize when they're going into an analyst role in particular is there is no way not to make mistakes, because every single turn of a large presentation you build, your model, there will almost always certainly be mistakes, because there's just so many pages, so many little things, and everything needs to be perfect. And I think when people look from the outside, they watch TV shows or movies about bankers, it's like, oh, all these hot shots who think they're all that. But you actually need to be very humble and, as you said, coachable. You need to portray that in interviews, because the analyst role, you're at the bottom of the totem pole and you're doing a lot of the grunt work, and you need to be able to accept all that feedback and work well with others, basically. Hey guys, if you're interested in banking recruiting, you may also eventually want to get an MBA. And if that's the case, I wanted to let you know about Target Test Prep, which I credit a lot for helping me score a 750, which equates to the 98th percentile on the old GMAT. Target Test Prep has been helping students crush the GMAT for 16 years and covers quant, verbal, and data insight for the GMAT focus, with 52 rigorous chapters broken into over 1,500 lessons, over 4,000 realistic GMAT problems, over 1,300 instructor-led videos, 1,200 digital flashcards for studying on the go, and live online support from GMAT-focused experts. Target Test Prep is also the only company on GMAT Club with a perfect 5-star rating, and they also have the highest score improvement guarantee of 130 points. You're able to personalize your study plan and practice tests to whatever works best for you. And if you're interested, you can try TTP for 5 days completely for free using my link in this video's description. And you can also get 15% off if you use my code rareliquid15. With that, let's get back to the video. I was curious if you had any behavioral questions that caught you off guard throughout your interview process, or were they all pretty similar? Just like, why Evercore? Tell me about yourself, like team leadership related questions.
Yeah, so one of my MDs during one of my super days, he's an interesting fellow. He worked in the media industry, and then he worked in the media team at the firm. But he heard my background talking about being international and whatnot, and so he asked me very point blank, "How do you find that experience?" And it's something that I haven't been asked before, and so it was sort of shocking. But I think the reason why I felt almost shakier on that than any other behavioral question that I've received is because I haven't practiced it. And so it goes back to what I was saying about not only do you want to understand the finance, but you need to have done many reps with your life story and the experiences that you bring to the table. And I was able to basically turn it into a question that I had practiced for, which is what are some of the qualities you bring to the table that perhaps make you a better candidate than others? And obviously the first answer you give is, I don't know who the other candidates are, so I can't say that I'm better than them, but here's what I bring. And I talked about adaptability and resiliency, and growing up in one culture and moving to another, you're bringing something with that, and having done well enough to be in whatever programs I was in, it shows grit. And so I turned this into essentially a pitch me yourself story. But the point is that they can ask anything, and you need to be well versed enough with your own life story and well versed enough with your sort of underlying goals and motivations that you can speak fluently to that. And I think a lot of people don't do enough soul searching prior to their call it interviews or even internships, or even having the real role and then realizing, is this what I want to do? And so that when people ask me, especially students early on in their experience, I almost encourage them to do that first. Before you hit the technical books, before you start to learn all the accounting, think about what it is that drives you and why you think banking is a good fit. And obviously you'll learn more along the journey that might steer you elsewhere or reinforce what you've already learned. But if you don't know who you are, it becomes very hard to figure out what job you want to do.
Yeah, I I 100% agree with you there. I was also very existential when I was in college. I was always thinking about, what is my purpose? So I was probably doing that on my own anyway, but I think it worked to my benefit of doing a lot of like self reflection and brainstorming about what I enjoy, what my strengths, weaknesses are, what drives me. And that's what I always also recommend to people who are recruiting for any job, to make sure you do a lot of deep, as you said, soul searching reflection about who you are before you're able to come up with any good answers to any behaviorals. And the other thing you said is something I also think is very important, which is that I think the key to being well prepared for behaviorals is not having the answer to every single question mapped out before an interview, but being able to be very adaptable, and whatever answers and stories you have or reflection that you've done, you're able to bring all of that and kind of realize that a lot of questions are all kind of very similar, and you can use stories you've already prepared to answer those questions. So, but on the note of, you being asked about being international, a lot of people who I even know personally have wanted to work at banks, and they're international, like non-US, and we're trying to work at a US company, or US bank. Do you have any tips for international students when they're recruiting for banking?
Yeah, totally. I would say much of what I espoused about non-target, getting fewer shots, having to be really well prepared, having your story, that becomes doubly true for internationals. I'll tell the story of recruiting. Like my first interview during my recruiting season was for Houlihan Lokey, and that year they just weren't taking international students. But it actually took a couple of interviews before they realized that that policy had changed, and then the year later they changed it again. So my international friends were able to work there. It's an ever moving goalpost, and you need to take it on the chin. It's nothing. I would think it's nothing against you individually. It's a complicated system, and it just means that the chances you do get, you have to do super well at. The other point, which honestly is again similar to non-targets, you're probably coming from a country that you might not have a lot of connections in this country specifically, and if you do, that's great, and you should leverage them. I'm a big believer in having warm introductions and leveraging your network. But if you are like me, then you didn't have anyone working in finance in New York or in the US anywhere. And so you need to double down on being very proactive about the organizations you join and getting into very good leadership positions there, or being on a path to leadership positions there. You need to essentially, if there's anyone at your school that is in a position that they're going to Wall Street and they're willing to help you, you need to stress your situation to them and say, I am willing to, work for you in an organization, or essentially tell me what I need to do to get you to help me out, because this is my position and you are my perhaps one of two tickets or few tickets to the role or the career that I desire. And then the last point, which comes with a story as well, the US is not the only market, and you are doing university here, and so you probably want to stay in the US, but it could be a momentary sidetrack to go and work elsewhere and then come back. So I had a friend who started at another bank, a bulge bracket, and he was from Australia. And he worked for 6 months and realized he's running out of time on his visa. He isn't going to get the H-1B. There really wasn't. So he had done all the things right. He was working here, and he decided it makes sense for me to move to London, see how that goes for a couple of years, and then move back. So he didn't make that decision. He didn't have to make that decision during his recruiting, but it's certainly, I think, getting a degree or having education in the US is not to be belittled if you're applying for international roles. And it's certainly option B. You should try your best at staying in the US and having that role that you wish to have. But it should be a contingency plan that you're working on the sidelines, because there are many international centers and hubs of finance that are looking for talent, and you could almost be in a better position than for the US market.
Right. Yeah. I've had a good number of friends also in similar situations end up going to London or Hong Kong, Singapore, for banks when they're international students. And when you're trying to figure out which banks sponsor, I don't know, are there any good resources or websites where you can figure that out? Or is it really a matter of you just trying to get to know each bank and then you just figure out one by one?
Yeah, so I would say the H-1B database is sort of the holy grail of it can be a little outdated, because if a bank is applying for an H-1B for someone, it could mean that 3 years ago they were sponsoring or willing to take international interns. And as with the case with Houlihan, they seemed to be sponsoring, but that year they changed their policy. So honestly, the best you can do is try and get a hold of a recruiter or someone at the bank, or even your career center, if that exists. Try and find a way to connect with someone at the firm that you can ask, hey, are you currently sponsoring students? Are you open to international students? I can speak for Evercore and say that a large portion of our intern classes end up being international. We take many kids from Western University in Canada, and I want to say, out of a class of 60, there was a total of maybe 20 or 25 international folks. So, Evercore is one option. There are others. I think RBC takes international folks. I want to say the bulge brackets are pretty open-minded about this stuff, but it is best to try and get a hold of someone. And you're probably trying to get a hold of a recruiter anyways. So just ask that question when you get a chance.
Okay. And then when it comes to going back to one of like the original or first things we talked about, which is just more about non-target backgrounds kind of breaking in, although you were in a slightly different situation given you were in a master's program as well, do you have some tips for establishing relationships with bankers? Because that's one of the most important things coming from a non-target that you do need to do. Like, do you have any tips when it comes to like networking and establishing relationships with bankers?
Yeah, totally. And so let me just preface by saying, I think the first place everyone should start is still on campus. There are folks there. If you're lucky, there is someone who had already done the work and has an internship coming up, or has done an internship, or there are a couple of folks that are on Wall Street, especially if you're in a non-target setting. Those will be your sort of gatekeepers, and trying to figure out how to get in touch with them and how to get them on your side will be crucial. I was in a fortunate position where the master's program itself had a couple of relationships on Wall Street. But, for example, the director of the program is also a professor, and I took his class. It was after I had recruited, but I met him during my recruitment process. And, he's not a banker. He didn't have anything to do with banking, but he holds a number of key relationships. And so even relying on your professors, and you're most likely taking courses in the business school, and many of the professors there will have at some point crossed paths with people that continue to be on Wall Street. And so much the same way that everyone will tell you it's great to have good professor relationships for rec letters and whatnot, and being a TA, I would say it's crucial, if you have no other recourse, to have those relationships for the purpose of then branching out and having a reference, having a warm connection into Wall Street. And that really gets to my bigger point, which is I don't believe in cold outreach as much as perhaps even several layers removed warm recommendations. I have been on the receiving end of thousands of emails from people that I've never met, attaching their resumes, trying their hardest, and perhaps even being very good candidates. But in the flow of things, when I'm working from 10 a.m. until 3 a.m. Every day on end, it becomes very difficult to sort of meet the threshold of action. And oftentimes, there are specific avenues through which resumes have to come in. And at a junior level, I can't necessarily even give a recommendation internally. I can certainly say, hey, I've seen this resume before. And when we're doing first round chats, I can try and figure out who is going to be interviewing them, so that I can say, I know this person, I can vouch for them because I've had a great conversation. But I can't do that for many people. And so I sort of reserve that time for someone who did come through a warm recommendation, or I'd known them before. And so the point is, if you can find anyone in your circle, in your circle's circle, or even in your family's circle that is tangentially related to Wall Street, that's a better start than just shooting a bunch of emails. And especially when you forget to change the firm that you're sending your emails to, and someone at Evercore receives a hey, interested in Lazard sort of email, which has certainly happened as well. But that's there's no silver bullet, and it takes time and it takes work, and each person's journey will be independent and unique. And so what worked for me might not work for you, but you have to try everything to make sure that, again, coming from a non-target as an international, you basically go to sleep knowing you've tried everything.
Yeah. And on the networking portion, I do think it's very, very tough. And there are it really depends on the person, whether or not it works well for them or not. But I do 100% agree that the warm leads is going to be make everyone's lives easier at the end of the day, like your life and then the banker's life. They'll want to talk to you more and all of that. So I always recommend really exhausting every single potential connection you possibly can. And LinkedIn makes it a lot easier too. Like if you find some bankers, you might have a mutual connection, like try to get that connection to connect you and all of that. And then at the very, very end of your entire networking process, if you just completely run out, then you can start cold emailing with like a very personalized message if you can. I certainly also received a lot of emails when I was in banking, and I did actually reply to ones that were from my school, and I was kind of part of the recruiting team. So like I always kind of kept a pulse on like who was recruiting from Berkeley. And kind of on that note, like, were you part of the recruiting team at all? Or you sound you I think you said you built like the technical questions. So were you a part of the recruiting team at Evercore as well for your school?
Yeah, so I was involved with recruiting for what's called Beyond Core, which are a subset of schools where there are some alumni at the firm, but perhaps not enough, or it's not regular enough recruiting where it would be considered a core school. So the difference is, for example, Western or UPenn might be in the core bucket, and they get 5 to 7 people coming every single year. UF is in the Beyond Core bucket. We usually get 2 people a year. And so it's certainly better than there's a third bucket called non-core, where you might be lucky to get one person a year, or if there's no candidates that make it through the program, there's no one that year. But it's sort of this middle ground. And so with UF, we take very good care of our incoming folks, and we try to make sure that we are selecting them even before they get sort of into that first round process. And I mentioned that happened to me as well. There are a number of pre-conversations, especially with folks that had just finished their internship and are coming back for the full time. They're back on campus. They can do a lot of time sort of screening who are the best candidates, who's in the right organizations, how are they performing in those organizations. So there's a lot of information that is above and beyond your resume and the official recruitment process. So I was involved with all of that when I was still on campus. Once I moved and was at Evercore, I held a number of first round interviews, both for UF and then for Beyond Core for schools that I was not a part of. And then I also was heavily involved in essentially helping make sure that the people that do come to Evercore are successful. And so I saw a class of interns, and then as I was leaving, there was another class of incoming interns, and effectively we just wanted to make sure that they all have the keys to success, so that they can actually do well in banking once they've done all this work to get there. And I think your question was, if I was involved in how that worked, or I'm not sure if
Yeah, I wanted to go next a little bit into giving, peeling the curtain a little bit and then going through, first of all, I guess going step by step. When you got I assume maybe you got a batch of resumes for all the people from your school. Like, what were the things that you guys were looking for? And for us at JP Morgan, when I was leading recruiting, we would get the batch of resumes, print them all out. We would literally be in a conference room with 5 of us, and then we would kind of discuss, like, we were looking for above this GPA, these professional experiences, score them literally like out of 5 or 10, and then like kind of add up the scores, and then that's kind of how we did it. It was not anything really fancy. We were just like literally scoring resumes like they were exam papers in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like for you guys?
Yeah, so it's much the same. Essentially, what we ended up doing was creating a shared document, or we might have even just made a template, and then everyone takes a rider and then combines at the end. But we would go through resumes much as you described, and we would look at GPAs, relevant courseworks. We know all the organizations on campus. There are new ones coming up all the time, so we might have to just refresh our memory. But we know the ones that are rigorous, and we know the roles that, by the time you're a sophomore applying, if you're an analyst, that means you either didn't join in time or you haven't doing well. If you're an associate in this organization, that means you're doing really well. If you're a sector lead or something above that, that means you're one of the few that sort of really get it, and you're on a path to success. And so we would have all those insights having just been at the University of Florida. And so those were perhaps I would say, easiest in terms of knowing who to give an interview to, and even, going through the interview, knowing what to ask to get to some of the second layer information that we couldn't gauge from the resume. The other part that also matters are your professional experiences outside of school. And so even just seeing that people did, when I was in uh, in a prior life. Like I used to work at my aunt's bar in the Czech Republic. I spent a summer sort of cleaning her apartments that she rents, and then working behind a bar. That's not glamorous work, but I can talk about it. It's sort of you get your hands dirty. You know what hard work looks like. If I see someone being a busboy or seeing someone that's a golf caddy, it's sort of a signal to me that's okay. These people have worked in their life, and it's not just sort of resume embellishment because they know they need to put something there. And maybe I should ask about it during the first round interview to make sure that it's real. And we, to be honest, we erred on the side of caution, and we actually gave more first round interviews than less. I think we would always hold back a couple people where just the GPA wasn't enough, or the resume wasn't formatted, or something that just showed there was a lack of care. But the people that passed sort of the smell test, they got a first round, and then that would take place with, for UF folks, it was two people because we wanted to be able to cross-reference and see what different folks think. For the Beyond Core process, it was just one person giving you that first round interview. And then following that, that's when the real, I guess rubber meets the road. You really have to make a decision. Is this person good enough to pass on to a super day? And actually for the UF process, oftentimes we would have to run a second or a third round just to narrow down from 20 very qualified candidates down to maybe two that we then pass on to a super day, hoping that they get the full-time offer. So I would say it's similar to what you described. There's scrutiny on the resume, but as long as you pass some, I wouldn't call it basic, but a bar, you can then get to the first round, and that's where all the marbles are. You really need to perform well because that is your shot to the super day, and then it continues to be competitive there. I would say out of maybe 12 people that interview each day, 4 are guaranteed spots, and another, either 2 to 4 get a spot or are waitlisted. So it's sort of still a 50-50 at that point.
Right. And then when it came to selecting the people from the first day to go to Super Day, did you guys just mainly have like all the notes from all the interactions, the coffee chats, and then kind of get into a room with your recruiting team and just make a selection that way? Or did you guys have some kind of, like that's kind of how we did it. It was a little bit informal in a lot of ways because we had all the notes and everything, but then it's not like we've interviewed or interacted with every single candidate. So like a banker would really need to kind of like pound the table for you in a sense, and you as a candidate needed to have made a really strong impression throughout the recruiting process and networking and all that stuff, and do well in interviews to get that super day. What was it like for you guys?
So I would say there were cases where it was clear. There were students who uh, just did so well across the first round interview where there was no question that they should pass on to, the second round, the third round, or the super day. And those were really the standouts, and it's quite easy to do that. And then on the other end, there were students who clearly weren't prepared, and they missed a number of questions to the point where we would just cut interviews short because if you're not getting the basic questions, it's a waste of both of our times. And then the middle is exactly as you described. If you had positive interactions with, and it doesn't have to be us at the table. It could be someone on campus who sent us a note when we would reach out to the folks still on campus saying, here are the 20 people that we are thinking of interviewing for a first round. Do you have anything that you want to flag? Are there any concerns from their performance in organizations, or are there any, call it spark notes that you would want to highlight? And oftentimes they're very helpful because it's this sort of, I would say, unfiltered experience that doesn't make it to a resume, and certainly will not be highlighted in an interview. And so with all that in mind, if someone made a great impression, that's a plus. If someone had red flags, that's going to come up in that conversation. But it ends up being, I think at the time there were maybe 5 of us or 6 of us in that debrief room, essentially deciding who gets to move on. And you can, it's imperfect. Certainly there are scores that we all kept, and there are, how many questions did someone miss, and how meaningful were the questions they missed. But it also comes down to how did they present themselves, and were they, was it clear they were stressed out, and were they having a hard time presenting their answers and their thoughts? And because all those things eventually matter in the super day. And so I would say the number one sort of through line that ran across everything was how will they do in the super day? Because it's one thing to gets sent to the Super 8. It's another thing to succeed there. And so everything we try to, and I think you have said this in a separate session, but it's almost like gladiators fighting at that point. You're trying to select your strongest warriors to go and get the return offer. So, or get the internship offer.
Right. Yeah. And then you're so proud and happy if you do send your candidates and they're able to actually convert the offers, because it kind of is a bloodbath at the end of the day, with at least half the people or so rejected. And then you were talking a lot about, the candidates who really stand out, like for sure, no brainer, they should get an offer. Like, what do you think are some of the qualities and things you've seen from the people and the candidates who are just extremely good? Like, and hopefully people who are watching this can kind of think about as well, like, what are things I can take away to improve my interviewing skills or how I come off in interviews and whatnot in order to hopefully secure an offer?
Yeah, totally. I would say the very almost basic or easiest place to start is your technicals. You need to be able to get every question right and get it right quickly and have a logical way of walking through your answer. So especially on questions that are multi-part or require you to do a couple calculations. A great example is all those tell me about how a change will flow through income statement, balance sheet, cash flow. Having a system for that, and that way not missing anything, and essentially making sure that the interviewer is never lost. Like, those were fantastic sort of giveaways that this person prepared very well. The other part would be knowing, or almost going above and beyond, where if I ask an open-ended question, it's not a 2-word response. It's, here, I will give you 50% of what I know, and then I'll say, I'm happy to go into detail. And if I do push into that detail, you actually can tell me more, or you can continue to elaborate on this topic. And again, that doesn't come from memorizing M&I 400. That comes from spending the time learning finance and knowing what banking is about. And then on the behavioral front, I would say certainly knowing a story and being able to have convincing answers to some of the basic questions you'll be asked. So if I asked you why you want to work at Evercore and your answer is, I would love to work at a boutique, I mean, it's a start, but it's certainly not concrete enough. It doesn't give me any flavor. Having been at the firm at that point for at least a year, I know there are very unique things about Evercore that are not the same at Lazard or Moelis. And so again, finding a way to have those specifics, and there's plenty written online, and if you do get to speak to anyone prior to your interviews, those should be questions you're digging into. And the other one, and I know we talked about this in a separate session, but having a level of, one, confidence or reassurance in the things you're saying. Your answers should not sound like questions, but also not being arrogant or overly confident, and recognizing there is a clear power structure and power dynamic within this interview, and I keep that in mind, and I defer to the interviewer, and I don't mess up by doing too much. So those would be, those were things I looked out for. If I happen to share a hobby with someone, or we had a great conversation, that's great, and that's a plus. But certainly it is all undone if they can't answer my questions after that.
Right. You are also talking a bit about the why Evercore question, and you don't have to give like an interview answer in anything like that, but from your experience, having worked at the firm for 2 years, what are some things about Evercore that if you now looking back, like, again, I don't need like an interview answer, but more so like, what are the great things that you found about working at the firm?
I came into work every single day knowing I will not be the smartest person in any room. And that goes for my classmates, that goes for my bosses. I was fortunate enough to work under Jonathan Nee, who wrote The Accidental Investment Banker. And so these are people that have built the industry, and to get to interact with them, and everyone at Evercore, I would say broadly, is we started out very small. We sort of helped found the whole boutique model. And so you have to invest a lot in your people if they are your number one resource. We don't have a balance sheet. We can't rely on that. We have to rely on pure intellectual capacity. And that still is true at the firm. They invest a ton in their analysts and associates, well, and so on and so forth. But in my experience, I felt like I had the support of the entire firm, certainly my team, but even folks across the firm. And the internship is generalist, so you get to see that in action because you're working across a number of teams. And I also saw the pride that people take in their work. There's a level of excellence that I have folks and friends that work at other banks, and I don't want to smear them or in any way say that they're not excellent, but I would like to think that just the level of rigor that we experienced at Evercore was unique, and I would think we're better for it because it teaches you how to never take okay for good enough. You want to be excellent in all you do, but at the same time, everyone is quite personable, and there's a you mentioned how people watch movies and they might see bankers that used to be professional sports players and they think it's a cutthroat environment and it's going to be a bunch of American psychos, and that was anything but Evercore. Everyone is well balanced and they had interesting lives prior to this job, and they are happy to be your friends, and you can hang out with them outside of the office. And so if I had to sort of go through the recruitment process all over again, I would love to end up back at Evercore. I think it was a fantastic place to start. And, certainly there are horror stories from banking, but I'm not one of them. And I'm fortunate for that.
You were talking a little bit throughout that answer about how you felt like the firm really invested in you. And so could you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. You're paired with an official mentor. You're day one during the internship and then during full time as well. In my team specifically, we would have 30-minute breakfasts, with every partner on the team on a rotating fashion. So you get to really meet the people that are assigning you work. I would say that the firm broadly is trying very hard to make sure that analysts are seen and heard, and the whole industry is going through sort of a tough moment when it comes to overworking and seeing how best to respond to that. And I would say we have been very front-footed, or Evercore has been front-footed about tracking hours and making sure that analysts are, sounding the alarms when need be. And staffers have been doing a good job of essentially getting a grasp of what is happening and what are the real hours being worked. But also just, and this is sort of harder to maybe put into tangible experiences, but on my team, I was fortunate enough that my second year, so the analysts that were there when I came in, were willing to spend all the time I needed to make sure I'm up to speed. Obviously, you have to be competent. If I was incompetent, I couldn't do the job. They would quickly lose patience. But it's, you are now here. You've made it through the internship. You got the return offer. So every person that I worked with wanted to make sure that I am getting it and that I am succeeding without too much struggle. There were certainly situations where I was alone against a problem and you have to figure it out on your own. And it's one of the traits that banking is known for. But I would say 85, 90% of my experience was shared with someone else that is interested in my success. And then I passed it on to my first year. So I saw a class sort of grow up under me, and it was obvious. It was a no-brainer to spend the time with them and to be invested in their success, because they will then carry on the torch, and it was done for me. And so it's this culture of caring for each other and wanting to make sure that in this very difficult job, the people are not being difficult and we're making it as smooth as possible for each other.
Got it. Yeah. And I will say that is not something I had at JPM, because we weren't given that. Maybe interns were given like mentors, but actually, from my group at least, we were really small. So I guess like it was, I guess, not part of our group culture for that reason, maybe because everyone kind of helped each other a little bit here and there. But I know for a lot of the groups at JPM, I don't think we're right on day one, like given a mentor who like checks in on you and all of that. So yeah, I do think that I've heard a lot of good things about Evercore's culture, and so that's why I was a little bit curious about it. Was also curious just about a small thing about like, do you guys have like work from home on Fridays or anything, or like perks
Yeah,
that were good as well?
so I don't know if it's going to change in the future, but for now we are 4 days in the office, Fridays from home. You get, your dinner stipend, your Ubers after certain hours. I would say the teams are very understanding of personal situations. And so we've had folks travel and continue to work, even though they might have been abroad or somewhere else in the country because they had situations that demanded it. And I would also say, and it's team specific, so my experience might be different from someone else at Evercore. And certainly within a class of 60 analysts, there will be those that had great experiences and those that might not repeat their experience. but I would say the firm is overall understanding that we are still people and we need certain barriers and guardrails. And so even on the work life front, concepts like protected Saturdays, managers had to get permission before teams could work Saturdays. And again, if you did work, you tracked all your hours. And so I had HR call me at some point after I had worked a number of Saturdays saying, are you okay? And is there anything you need us to do? Because we understand it might not be the easiest thing to, I don't know, vouch for yourself. And so again, banking gets a difficult rap because it's the same as net promoter scores. The people that are really satisfied will tell you about it, and the people that really hated it will tell you about it. And the quiet middle is there, but you don't know if it's a perfect distribution or if the people that hate it are 1% and they're just very loud. I would like to think that from what I've seen and my folks, a class of 60, we were mostly okay, and the firm does a lot to try and make sure that you stay okay.
Gotcha. Yeah, and it's great to hear. I think banking is tough, but if you're able to join a firm/group with a good culture, that can make really all the difference. And it's about an hour now, and so I wanted to just end with kind of like a catch-all question about anything banking, recruiting, or maybe your experience in banking. If there's anything you'd like to share. Is there any advice you'd like to give, or to like your former self, or like anything we didn't cover that you think might be important?
Yeah, I would actually say the connections you make and sort of the network you start to build as you are trying to get into banking. I wish I had done a better job of staying in touch with those folks or remaining in contact even after I got into banking. It's easy to lose relationships once you're in the working 80 to 100 hours a week period of your life. But then you sort of, having been on the other side now, having come out of it, you wish you had sent a text message once every month to a person that was crucial to your process and kept them updated on how you're doing, or asked to get coffee once every quarter to update them and hear how they're doing. And they might be on to more interesting things. And I think I was very single-minded when it came to building a network to get into banking. And then I reprioritized my time to be fully focused on the job and executing as well as I could. And coming out of the fog of war now, having finished the job, I think once you spend time building a network, it would be great to keep it. And so that's one advice, where you do all this, you put in all this effort, you find people that are willing to help you. And just because they help you once certainly means that they're more inclined to help you in the future. So that's perhaps less usual of an answer than folks might be expecting. But I would say it's one of the things I wish I had done better.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I left banking and I haven't really kept in touch with a lot of the colleagues, because we're just in very different fields now, kind of, like they're still in finance or working on like making YouTube videos and stuff. But I think it would have been great if I was able to keep in touch with them a little more. So I definitely echo your thoughts there. And yeah, as you said, you finished your 2-year stint in banking, and now you're able to relax before your next job. Not that much less intense in PE, but hope you enjoy it. Thanks for all the advice. I'm sure everyone listening will be able to apply a lot of what they learned today. And so thanks so much. And I'll be in touch.
Yeah, thank you as well. And good luck to everyone. I know it's a tough process. If you land a job, it's fantastic. And if you don't, there are plenty of other cool jobs out there. So that's perhaps the last piece of advice, which is it's not everything. Life goes on.
Right. All right. Thanks so much, Marek.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, so that concludes the interview. Hope you all learned a lot from Marek and from his insights. And as a friendly reminder, if you're interested in breaking into banking, feel free to check out my one-to-one mentorship program, The Banking Accelerator, using the link in the description below. That's it. Thank you all so much, as always, for tuning in. Hope to catch you all in the next one.